Family invited a ballerina instead of the star dancer. What happened left them speechless. The sound of soft piano music echoed in a quiet dance studio as 10-year-old Lila moved across the wooden floor. Her feet barely made a sound, her arms floated like feathers, and every step she took was full of grace. She was small, but her presence was strong, like she belonged on a much bigger stage. Sweat ran down the side of her face, but she didn't stop. Not when her muscles ached, not when her legs shook. She kept dancing. She always did. In the corner, her ballet teacher, Miss Caroline, watched closely, nodding with quiet pride. "Beautiful, Lila," she said softly. "Keep your arms a little higher. Yes, just like that." Lila smiled through her tired breath. "I've been practicing every night after homework," she said. Miss Caroline walked over and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "It shows," she said. "You've got something special, Lila. You just need the right stage." Lila's smile faded slightly. She nodded, but deep down she wondered if a stage like that would ever come. She wasn't from a rich family. Her ballet shoes were hand-me-downs, and her costumes were sewn together by her mother at the kitchen table. At that very moment, across town, a very different scene was unfolding. In a huge mansion surrounded by tall gates and expensive cars, the Rutherford family was busy preparing for their daughter Emily's birthday party. And it wasn't just any party, it was the kind people talked about for months. Caterers rushed in and out of the kitchen with trays full of tiny perfect food. Tables were covered in white silk, chandeliers sparkled overhead, and classical music played from hidden speakers. Standing in the center of it all was Elizabeth Rutherford, with a diamond necklace and a voice that made everyone walk faster. She wanted this party to be perfect, nothing less. "Is the dancer confirmed?" she asked sharply, turning to the party planner. "Yes, ma'am," the planner said quickly. "Rebecca from the Willowbrook Ballet Academy, the star dancer. Everything is arranged." Elizabeth gave a tight smile. "Good, only the best for our Emily." Upstairs, little Emily twirled in her pink dress, dreaming of the moment when Rebecca would dance in her living room. "She's so beautiful," Emily whispered to herself. "I want to dance like her someday." Back in the small apartment and the other side of town, Lila and her mother were finishing a simple dinner of rice and beans. The kitchen table had a scratch down the middle, and the curtains were faded from the sun, but the room felt warm and full of love. "Did Miss Caroline like your dancing today?" her mom asked, pouring water into 2 glasses. Lila nodded. "She said I was getting better." Her mother smiled, tired but proud. She had worked a hospital shift all day and would leave soon for her second job at a local diner. She never complained. Not once. "That's because you work hard," she said. "Harder than anyone else." Lila looked down at her plate. "Mama, do you think someone like me could ever dance at a big party? Like the ones rich people have?" Her mother paused. She walked over, knelt beside her daughter, and took her hand. "Someone like you?" she repeated. "Misha, you could dance anywhere you want, on the biggest stage, in the fanciest house, even on the moon." Lila laughed softly. "Even on the moon?" Her mother smiled. "Even there. Because what matters isn't how much money we have, it's how much heart you have." Lila didn't say anything, but her heart felt a little lighter, a little stronger. Then, just as her mother stood up to wash the dishes, the phone rang. It was Miss Caroline. Her voice was quick and serious. "Lila, something's happened. Rebecca got sick. She can't perform at the Rutherford party tonight." Lila froze. "I told the director you could do it. I believe in you, but we need to leave in 30 minutes. Her eyes went wide. "Me? The Rutherford party?" "Yes," Miss Caroline said gently. "You know the routine. You've practiced it 100 times. This is your moment." Lila looked over at her mom, who had stopped drying her hands. There was surprise in her eyes. Fear. but also something else. Hope. Lila's voice shook as she asked, "What if I mess up?" Her mom knelt down again, looked her in the eyes. "You won't. You've worked too hard to mess up. Just be you." That's when Lila felt it. Something in her chest like wings. She looked back at the phone. "I'll be ready," she said. And just like that, a little girl who had never stepped foot in a mansion, never been part of the elite crowd, was about to walk into a world that wasn't built for her and take the stage. That's when Lila got a call that would change everything. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the quiet kitchen as Lila stood frozen, the phone still in her hand. Her mother's eyes searched her face. "What did she say, mija?" Lila slowly lowered the phone, her fingers trembling. "Miss Caroline," she said, "Rebecca can't perform at the Rutherford party. She's sick, and they want me to go instead." The words hung in the air like smoke. Her mother blinked, unsure if she'd heard correctly. "You?" she said softly. "At the Rutherford mansion?" Lila nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "In 30 minutes." There was a long pause. Then her mother reached for the back of a chair and slowly sat down. "Ay, Dios mío." For a moment, neither of them moved. They just looked at each other. Two people in a tiny kitchen, one tired, the other terrified. "Do you want to do it?" her mother asked finally. Lila opened her mouth, then closed it again. "I don't know," she admitted. "I want to, but I'm scared." Her mother gave a small smile, the kind that hides 1,000 worries. "Good," she said. "Being scared means it's important." Lila looked down at her hands. "What if they laugh at me? What if I get out there and freeze?" Her mother leaned forward. "Then you take a deep breath and keep going, like you always do." Lila didn't answer right away. She stared at the floor, her mind spinning. The Rutherford party, the rich family, the guests, the mansion, and her. Just a little girl with second-hand shoes and a dream bigger than her body. But Miss Caroline believed in her. And her mother always believed in her. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to believe in herself too. "I want to try," she said finally. Her mother stood up and kissed the top of her head. "Then let's get you ready." They moved quickly, after that. There was no time to overthink. No time to panic. Lila washed her face, brushed her hair into a tight bun, and carefully pulled her white ballet leotard out of the closet. It was the cleanest one she owned. Miss Caroline had helped them buy it last year. A few threads were loose around the shoulder, but it was still beautiful. Her mother watched her like she was memorizing every detail. She ironed a soft scarf and wrapped it gently around Lila's shoulders. "It's chilly out tonight," she said, even though they both knew it wasn't. It was just a mother's way of holding on. At exactly 2:30, a sleek black car pulled up outside their building. Lila peeked through the blinds. It looked like it had come from another planet. She turned to her mother, suddenly nervous again. "What if I'm not what they're expecting?" Her mother crouched in front of her. "You're not," she said, brushing a curl away from Lila's cheek. "And that's exactly why they need to see you." Lila's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. She didn't want to cry. Not now. She wanted to be strong. As they walked out the front door and into the warm afternoon air, Miss Caroline met them at the curb. She was already dressed, in black and holding a garment bag. "Here," she said, unzipping it. Inside was a soft white tutu covered in tiny silver sparkles. "You'll wear this." Lila's mouth dropped open. "Where did you get it?" "I've had it for a long time," Miss Caroline said. "I was saving it for someone special." Lila touched the fabric gently. "It's perfect." Miss Caroline knelt down. "Listen to me," she said. "You're not going there to fit in. You're going there to shine. Don't think about the crowd. Don't think about their faces. Just think about the music. Let it carry you." Lila nodded slowly. She could feel something building inside her now. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something bigger. She climbed into the car, her mother beside her, Miss Caroline in the front. As the driver pulled away, Lila looked out the window at the streets. She knew. The laundromat, the bakery, the small park where she used to twirl in the grass. They were fading behind her. Ahead of her was the Rutherford mansion. Ahead of her was a world she'd never stepped into. She didn't know what would happen when she got there. She just knew this was her moment. This wasn't just about dancing. It was about showing them who she was and proving to herself and the world that she belonged. No matter where she came from, no matter what they expected. She was ready. At least, she hoped so. The long driveway to the Rutherford mansion stretched ahead like a road to another world. Lila pressed her face to the car window, her eyes wide. She'd never seen anything like it. Tall trees lined the path, their branches perfectly trimmed. A row of fountains sparkled in the afternoon sun. As they drove closer, the mansion came into view, 3 stories tall, with windows so clean they looked invisible. A group of valets stood by the front door, wearing matching suits. Lila's hands were clammy in her lap. She wiped them on her skirt without a word. Her mother, sitting beside her, gently squeezed her hand. "Still feeling brave?" she asked softly. Lila didn't answer right away. She was watching the guests through the window. Men in sharp tuxedos, women in long flowing gowns, children in clothes more expensive than their car. She felt small again, like she didn't belong here, like someone would take one look at her and say, "No, this must be a mistake." "I'm trying," Lila finally whispered, "but my stomach feels like it's doing pirouettes." Miss Caroline turned around from the passenger seat. "That means you're alive," she said with a smile. "Even the best dancers feel that. Way before a performance, it's not fear, Lila, it's energy. Let it help you." The car stopped at the front of the mansion. A uniformed staff member opened the door. Lila stepped out carefully, clutching the garment bag with her costume. The stone steps beneath her felt cold, even through her shoes. Inside, the house buzzed with movement. Music played softly from somewhere above. The smell of expensive perfume and polished wood filled the air. Servers in white gloves carried silver. Trays topped with tiny hors d'oeuvres Lila didn't even recognize. Nobody greeted them directly. They were led down a hallway and into a side room where chairs, a small mirror, and a water table had been set up. "This will be your prep room," the party coordinator said briskly. She glanced at Lila for only a second before returning to her checklist. "You'll be performing in about 20 minutes. Please be ready on time." Miss Caroline thanked her with a polite smile. As soon as the door shut, she turned to Lila. "All right, you have a few minutes to breathe and stretch. Your mom and I will stay close." Lila nodded and went to the mirror. She could barely see her reflection through the nervous blur in her eyes. Meanwhile, in the grand ballroom just down the hallway, the party was in full swing. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead like glowing ice. The walls were lined with velvet, curtains. Tables were stacked with pink and gold cakes, ice sculptures, and flower arrangements that looked like they belonged in a wedding. Guests sipped champagne and laughed loudly. There was no music playing just yet. Everyone was waiting for the main event. Emily Rutherford stood near the front with her perfectly curled blonde hair and glittering birthday sash. She held onto her mother's hand with excitement. "Mommy, when is the ballerina coming?" she asked. Elizabeth Rutherford smiled tightly. "Soon, darling. The best always arrive just in time." Charles Rutherford stood nearby, his arm resting on the back of a velvet chair. "She's the star of the academy, right?" he asked his wife. "Of course," Elizabeth replied. "Only the best for our Emily. She's everything a proper ballerina should be. Elegant, graceful, well-trained." She looked around the room, pleased with what she saw. Everything was perfect. Or so she thought. Back in the side room, Lila stepped into her costume. The tutu was delicate and white, with soft silver thread that shimmered under the lights. Her dark skin glowed against the fabric. Her curls were pulled back tightly, her ballet slippers tied just right. She looked down at herself and barely recognized the reflection in the mirror. She didn't look like the little girl from the tiny kitchen anymore. She looked like a ballerina. Miss Caroline placed, her hands gently on Lila's shoulders. "How do you feel?" Lila took a deep breath. "Like I'm standing at the edge of something big." Miss Caroline nodded. "You are, but you don't have to leap alone. We're right behind you." There was a knock at the door. The party coordinator peeked in. "5 minutes. Please be ready." Lila's heart thudded in her chest. 5 minutes. She thought of her mother working extra shifts. She thought of the hours she spent dancing barefoot in the living room. She thought of the time she'd fallen and cried but got back up again. She thought of the dream that lived inside her, and she decided it was worth the fear. She nodded once, steadying her breath. "Let's do this." In the ballroom, the crowd began settling into their seats. A small stage had been set at the front. The lights dimmed. The hum of conversation softened. Elizabeth stood and tapped her glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice cool and polished, "please welcome the star dancer from Willowbrook Academy, performing just for our darling Emily's birthday." A hush fell over the room. Behind the curtain, Lila took her first step toward the stage. She didn't know how they would react when they saw her, but she knew she had something to show them, something real, something they didn't expect. The music began to play, and Lila walked into the light. The music started soft, the opening notes floating through the ballroom like a whisper. Lila stood still, center stage, the spotlight warming her face. Her eyes squinted slightly as they adjusted to the bright light, and for a brief second, she couldn't see anything beyond it. Not the crowd, not the chandeliers, not even the birthday girl sitting in the front row, just the sound of music. She took a breath and moved. The first few steps were cautious, light and careful, like testing water before a swim. Her arms rose gently, forming that perfect first position. Her legs moved with practiced precision. She let the music carry her like she had done 1,000 times in her small studio back home. But this time, it was different. This time, every movement echoed in a grand room filled with strangers. In the audience, there was a flicker of confusion. A rustle. A whisper. "That's not Rebecca." "Who is that girl?" "Is this some kind of mix-up?" Elizabeth Rutherford leaned forward in her seat, eyes narrowing. Her expression froze. "What is this?" she whispered to her husband. Charles adjusted his tie, clearly just as surprised. "That's not the girl we hired." "No," Elizabeth hissed. "It most certainly is not." She looked toward the party planner on the side of the room, shooting her a sharp glare. This must be corrected immediately. But just as she moved to stand, Lila twirled. It wasn't just any spin. It was sharp, clean, elegant. Her white tutu flared gently as she completed a flawless turn, her arms floating like wings. And just like that, the room grew still. The whispers stopped. Eyes locked on the stage. The crowd, even if only for a moment, forgot what they were expecting and started watching what was unfolding, because something about the way Lila moved didn't feel ordinary. It didn't feel rehearsed. It felt like something was pouring out of her, something she'd held inside for so long. It was in the way her feet barely seemed to touch the floor, the way her arms lifted as if pulled by hope itself, the way her face glowed, not with makeup, but with something deeper. Purpose, courage, joy. Lila didn't see the silence she caused. She didn't hear the gasps or the eyes widening in disbelief. All she felt was the music and the memory of her mom's words. "You're not going there to fit in. You're going there to shine." She reached the halfway point of the performance and shifted into the more difficult sequence. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. Her chest ached from breath control. Her legs burned. But she didn't let it show. This was the routine she had practiced barefoot in the hallway while her mom boiled beans on the stove. This was the spin she had repeated 100 times until her ankles gave out and her tears hit the wooden floor. And now she was doing it. On a stage. In a mansion. Under crystal lights. In the front row, Elizabeth sat stiff as stone. Her lips were pressed tightly together. Her hands clenched her purse. Emily, the birthday girl, leaned forward on the edge of her seat, her eyes wide and shining. "She's beautiful," Emily whispered. Her mother didn't answer. Charles glanced at his daughter, then back at the stage. He said nothing either, but his expression was no longer angry. It was different, curious, even thoughtful. Lila leapt across the stage, the grand jeté she had struggled with for weeks. Her body rose into the air like a swan. She landed softly, gracefully, and flowed into the next movement without a break. A soft gasp rippled through the crowd. In the back of the room, Maria held her breath. She hadn't sat down once since the music started. Her fingers were clasped together so tightly they hurt, but she didn't notice. All she could do was stare at her daughter, her heart trembling with every step Lila took. Miss Caroline stood next to her, whispering only 2 words. "She's flying." And she was. Lila wasn't just dancing anymore. She was telling a story. Without words, without fear. A story of who she was, where she came from. What it meant to belong. What it meant to be overlooked. And still rise. People began to lean forward. Their expressions changed from confusion to curiosity, and finally to something deeper. Admiration. For a moment, it didn't matter that she wasn't Rebecca. It didn't matter that she didn't match the image they had imagined. Because what they saw was raw, real, and unforgettable. She reached the final stretch of the music. Her body was tired. Her legs shook from the effort. Her chest rose and fell quickly. But she smiled. Just a little, and then she spun, not once, not twice, but 10 perfect times, each one more precise than the last. The room held its breath. And when she stopped, landing in her final pose, arms extended, eyes closed. Silence. Just for a second. Then, applause. It started slow. One person, then another, then a wave, louder, clapping, cheers, whispers of, "Wow," and "Who is she?" and "That was amazing." Lila opened her eyes. She wasn't dreaming. She had done it. She bowed, her body trembling, but her heart full. She glanced into the crowd, just in time to see her mother, with both hands pressed to her mouth and tears in her eyes. She saw Emily, standing on her chair, clapping with both hands above her head. And she saw Elizabeth Rutherford, still seated, still silent, her face unreadable. Lila didn't know what that silence meant yet, but right now she had danced her truth, and the room had listened. The ballroom was still echoing with applause when Lila stepped off the stage. She could hardly believe it. Her heart was racing, her chest rising and falling with every breath. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the curtain. Behind it, Miss Caroline caught her in a tight hug. "You did it," she whispered. Her voice broke. "You really did it, Lila." Lila tried to speak but couldn't. Her voice had caught in her throat. Instead, she simply nodded, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. She'd danced her heart out. She'd felt it in every note, every turn, every leap. She had given them everything, and the crowd, they had clapped. They had stood. She had reached them, or so she thought, because just beyond the stage curtain, in the front row, Elizabeth Rutherford sat frozen in her seat. Her hands were stiff in her lap. Her jaw clenched so tight you could see the tension in her neck. Charles leaned toward her, his voice low. She was good. Elizabeth didn't look at him. That wasn't Rebecca, she said flatly. I know. We paid for Rebecca. We were promised someone of her status, someone appropriate. This wasn't what we agreed to. Charles's gaze drifted back toward the stage. But the crowd liked her. That's not the point, Elizabeth snapped, barely keeping her voice below a hiss. She didn't belong here. Did you see the way people looked when she walked out? They were confused, embarrassed. She danced beautifully, Charles said carefully. Elizabeth whipped her head toward him. That's not the issue. It's not about her dancing. It's about the image, the standard. This is our daughter's party, not a social experiment. Charles didn't answer. Instead, he turned his attention back to the room. The guests were still murmuring, and most of them were smiling. Some were approaching Maria at the back of the room, shaking her hand, asking questions. A man in a dark suit leaned in and whispered to his wife, "She might be the best dancer I've seen at one of these things." "She had such presence," the woman replied, "and she's just a child." Lila, still catching her breath backstage, peeked through the curtain. She could see the people smiling. A few were still clapping. One older woman had her hand over her heart, her eyes glossy, with emotion. And then she saw her mother. Maria stood just off to the side, still clutching her purse. She looked overwhelmed, tears streaking her cheeks, but proud. More proud than Lila had ever seen her. Lila's smile grew, just a little. Her chest ached with the emotion she'd held back on stage. This was the moment she had dreamed of. All. The hard work, all the doubt, all the tiny cracks in her confidence. It had all led to this. Then she heard the voice. "Where is the event coordinator?" Elizabeth's sharp tone sliced through the room like a blade. Lila's smile faded. Elizabeth marched across the ballroom with purpose, her heels clicking hard on the marble floor. She found Mrs. Patel, the planner, near the refreshment table. "I want to know exactly who made the decision to change performers without informing us," she demanded. Mrs. Patel blinked, startled. I was told by the Academy that there was a last-minute change. Rebecca fell ill, and they sent someone who knew the routine. I had no reason to believe we should have been informed," Elizabeth interrupted. That was not acceptable. Mrs. Patel lowered her voice. "But the girl, she was incredible." Elizabeth's eyes flashed. "That's not the point. We were made to look like fools in front of our guests. We invited people of a certain circle. And now, we've become the subject of whispers. Behind her." Charles quietly stepped away from the conversation. He wasn't sure what to say, and deep down, he wasn't sure he agreed with his wife. He wandered toward the back of the ballroom, where a small group of guests had gathered around Maria. A woman was speaking to her with a warm smile. "Is that your daughter? My goodness, she's extraordinary. What a presence. So much emotion in her dancing." Maria tried to find words, but all she could do was nod, overwhelmed. Charles watched them quietly. Meanwhile, backstage, Lila's chest tightened. She could feel the shift in the room, the tension pulling at the edges of the applause, the shadow behind the smiles. She turned to Miss Caroline. "They're upset, aren't they?" Miss Caroline nodded slowly. "Some are. Not all, but yes. Mrs. Rutherford isn't pleased." Lila looked down at her feet. "Because of me?" Miss Caroline knelt beside her. "No, sweetheart, because of her. Because she has a small heart and a narrow mind. You did nothing wrong." Lila didn't speak. Then came the tug on her hand. She turned and saw Emily, the birthday girl, standing beside her, holding something behind her back. "You were amazing," Emily said softly. Lila blinked. "You think so?" Emily nodded quickly. "Way better than Rebecca. You looked like magic." From behind her back, she pulled out a small bouquet of paper flowers. "I made these for whoever danced. I want you to have them." Lila took the crumpled bouquet with trembling hands. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever been given. "Thank you," she whispered. Emily smiled. "Will you teach me how to spin like that?" Before Lila could answer, the moment was broken. Elizabeth's voice called sharply from the front of the room. "Emily, come here, now." Emily jumped, startled. She gave Lila a quick smile before running off. Miss Caroline's jaw clenched. Maria had already started making her way backstage, concern written across her face. Lila looked at them all, her hands gripping the paper bouquet. The applause had faded. The air had shifted. She had danced with all her heart. But now, the part she feared most was about to begin. Maria reached the backstage area just as Lila was putting the paper flowers in her dance bag. Her mother's expression was tight, protective. "Come, Mija," she said gently. "We should go now." Lila looked up, confused. "Did something happen?" Before Maria could answer, Miss Caroline's voice cut in, firm but careful. "It's better if we don't stay long. The performance is over." "But the guests, some of them liked it," Lila said quietly. "Didn't they?" "They did," Miss Caroline said. "Many did, but not everyone." Just then, the curtain twitched open, and the voice they'd been bracing for came through like a cold wind. "There, you are?" Elizabeth Rutherford stood just inside the curtain, arms crossed, her sharp heels clicking against the polished floor. Her tone was calm, but it wasn't kind. Lila instinctively took a step back, closer to her mother. Elizabeth glanced at Miss Caroline, then at Maria. "I'd like to speak with the Academy's representative, please." Miss Caroline straightened. "That's me." Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. "Then I'll be direct. What happened here today was unacceptable. You sent someone completely different from what was agreed. No notice, no communication, just her." She gestured briefly toward Lila, as if saying her name out loud would somehow give the child more presence than she was willing to allow. Miss Caroline kept her voice even. "Rebecca fell ill. We made a quick decision, and I sent the most qualified dancer available," Elizabeth scoffed. "Qualified? She's 10. She's also remarkable." "She's not the image we paid for," Elizabeth snapped. A pause fell over the room. Miss Caroline stared at her, the words hanging heavy in the air. Then Maria stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "My daughter trained for years to dance that routine. She worked hard for this moment. She didn't take anything from anyone." Elizabeth turned to her, eyes narrowing. "With respect, your daughter had no place here. This is a private event, for families like ours." Lila's throat tightened. Her mother took her hand, holding it tightly. But, before anyone else could speak, another voice rose from behind Elizabeth. "I disagree." It was low, clear, calm. Everyone turned. An older woman stepped out from the crowd of guests, dressed in deep blue, silver hair tucked neatly behind her ears. Her presence carried weight. She didn't raise her voice, but somehow, when she spoke, the room listened. Elizabeth blinked. "Madame Dubois?" The woman nodded. "Yes. I was invited here as a guest, and I'm grateful I came." Elizabeth took a step back. "Of course, but I had no idea this young girl would be dancing today," Madame Dubois continued. "But I'm very glad she did. I've been in ballet circles for over 40 years. I've trained dancers who now perform on world stages." She turned to look at Lila. Her expression softened. "And I've rarely seen such raw grace, such presence, such soul." Lila blinked, not quite believing what she was hearing. Elizabeth tried to recover. With all due respect, she's not from the same background as our usual performers. No, she isn't, Madame Dubois replied. And that's exactly the problem. A hush fell across the guests gathering nearby. She doesn't come from privilege, Madame Dubois said, her voice rising ever so slightly. She doesn't have tutors or custom-made shoes, but she has something that cannot be bought: heart, passion, truth in every step. Elizabeth bristled. But this was a birthday party. A party your guests will remember because of her, Madame Dubois said. She turned back to Lila. My dear, she said gently, have you ever heard of the National Ballet Conservatory? Lila shook her head slowly. It's in New York. It's one of the most selective ballet programs in the world. I help manage it. And I'd like to invite you to our summer intensive program with a full scholarship. For a few long seconds, no one breathed. Lila's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her mother stared at Madame Dubois as if she'd misheard. Scholarship? Maria whispered. Madame Dubois smiled. Yes, I saw something rare on that stage, something we don't see often even in the best schools. She belongs with us. Lila's eyes filled instantly. Her mouth trembled. You really mean it? Madame Dubois stepped forward, placing a hand gently on Lila's shoulder. I never say things I don't mean. Behind them, the room had changed. The same guests who once whispered now clapped softly. Some stepped forward to offer congratulations. A few nodded at Maria, at Miss Caroline. The energy had shifted entirely, but Elizabeth Rutherford said nothing. She stood still, her face unreadable. Then Emily broke from her mother's side and ran to Lila, wrapping her in a hug. I told you you were better than Rebecca, she said. I want to dance like you one day. Elizabeth's lips parted in protest, but nothing came out. Madame Dubois turned back toward her. Mrs. Rutherford, with all due respect, what happened today wasn't a mistake. It was a gift. She gave Lila a warm nod. You've opened hearts today, child, including mine. And with that, she turned and walked away. Lila stood frozen, her hands shaking, her heart pounding. She looked up at her mother, tears in her eyes. Is this really happening? She whispered. Maria, still in shock, nodded slowly. Yes, mija, she said, her voice breaking. It's happening. Lila barely remembered the car ride home that night. She sat quietly beside her mother, holding the scholarship letter in her lap like it might vanish if she blinked. The paper still felt warm from Madame Dubois' hand. Her name was printed at the top, in elegant script. Lila Johnson, accepted to the National Ballet Conservatory's summer program. She traced her finger over each letter, still unsure if she was dreaming. Maria sat beside her, eyes forward, hands gripping her purse tightly. She hadn't spoken much since they left the Rutherford mansion. She didn't need to. Lila could feel the storm of emotions in the way her mother breathed, deep and careful, like every inhale was trying to hold in tears. When they finally reached home, Lila stepped inside, dropped her bag near the couch, and sat at the kitchen table without a word. Maria poured them both glasses of water. Neither of them touched it. Finally, Lila whispered, She hated me. Maria looked up. Mrs. Rutherford, Lila said softly. She looked at me like I didn't belong, like I ruined something. Maria walked around the table and knelt beside her daughter. Mija, she said gently. Some people carry small minds in big houses. That has nothing to do with you. Lila stared at the table. She said, I wasn't what they wanted. But you were what they needed, Maria said firmly. You showed them something real. You didn't just dance. You reminded them what beauty really is. Lila's eyes began to well. Mama, I almost believed her. For a second, I felt like maybe I really wasn't good enough. Maria cupped her face. "Don't you ever say that again, not even for a second." She pulled her daughter into a hug, tight and full of all the love that had carried them through every hard day. Lila held on, breathing into the warmth of her mother's shoulder, letting the pain melt into safety. That night, as Lila lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the moment replayed again and again. Not the anger, not the whispers, but the way the room had fallen silent during her final turn. The way Madame Dubois had spoken to her, not like a child, but like a dancer. The way Emily had hugged her and smiled like Lila had done something magic. That was what mattered, not one woman's cruelty, but how truth had broken through it. Over the next few weeks, the town buzzed with whispers. Some talked about the drama, others talked about the dancing, and some, quietly at first, talked about how proud they were, about how maybe, just maybe, that little girl from the East Side was something special. The local paper printed a small story. On the third page, "Young dancer earns national scholarship after surprise performance." No photo, just a name, but it was enough. At Willowbrook Ballet Academy, Miss Caroline pinned that article to her bulletin board like a trophy. When the day came to leave for New York, the airport was filled with more people than Lila expected. Classmates, neighbors, even strangers she barely knew. One by one, they handed her letters, cards, a homemade bracelet, a tiny teddy bear wearing a tutu. "You make us proud," someone whispered. "We're rooting for you," said another. And then, to her surprise, came Charles Rutherford. He walked slowly toward her, holding Emily's hand. Maria's back stiffened, but Lila stayed still. Charles looked uncomfortable, but honest. "I wanted to say, thank you," he said. "You danced beautifully. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That talent doesn't wear a specific face." He paused, then added quietly, "My wife, she's learning." Slowly. Emily stepped forward and hugged Lila tight. "I want to be just like you," she said again. Lila hugged her back. "You already are." Then, finally, it was time. Maria knelt beside her one last time before security. "Listen to me," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "No matter where you go, no matter how big the stage gets, you're my daughter. You carry my love with every step." "I know, Mama," Lila whispered. They held each other like they were saying goodbye to something bigger than just a moment, as if it was the end of one life and the start of another. Because it was. Lila stepped through security, her heart pounding. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew her mother was still there, watching, just like she always had. That summer, in New York, Lila trained harder than ever. She struggled at first. The classes were intense. The dancers were older, sharper, more experienced, but none of them had what Lila carried in her chest. That fire, that hunger, that long road behind her that had shaped every turn of her feet. She found her rhythm, and her light only grew. By the end of the summer, Madame Dubois sat her down in a quiet studio and asked, "Would you like to stay for the year-round program?" Lila didn't answer right away. She thought about home, her mom, the little kitchen, the quiet dance studio where it all began. Then she thought about the stage, the crowd, the feeling of dancing not just for applause, but to be heard. She smiled. "Yes, I would." 3 years later, Lila stood backstage at a grand theater in New York City. She was taller now, stronger, more confident. Her name was printed in the program. People whispered it as they took their seats. In the crowd sat Maria, front row, wearing the same scarf she'd ironed years ago. Her hands shook. Her eyes never left the curtain. And beside her, Emily Rutherford, holding her father's hand. Elizabeth wasn't there, but for the first time it didn't matter. The lights dimmed, The music began, and Lila danced. Not to prove she belonged, not to change anyone's mind, but because it was hers, because it always had been, and no one could take that away.